Hello and welcome back to Restoration Literature. Today we'll be looking at William Whycherly. Wycherley was born in the 1640s. Scholars debate what exact date he was born on, but it was in the 1640s, to a royalist family in England. William grew up being tutored by his father until the age of 15, when he was sent off to France to be taught by the Marquise de Montausseur. This was likely done because Cromwell had installed a Puritan education system which many royalist families did not want their children to attend. In France, many of the Stuart supporters converted to Catholicism. Wycherley was one of those. But when it became clear that the king would be restored to the throne, he reverted back to Protestantism. Upon returning to England, Wycherley enrolled in Queen's College, Oxford. There he intended to study philosophy, but like many students, he changed his degree and never finished philosophy, instead turning to literature. After university, there is a gap in his biography, and scholars are not quite sure what Wycherley was up to, but it is possible that he served as a navy officer or perhaps a diplomat. It isn't until the 1670s that he surfaces with a play that he had written, allegedly, before he attended university. It was called Love in a Wood, or St. James's Park. The play was performed in 1671 at the Theatre Royal in London. There it caught the attention of the Duchess of Cleveland, Barbara Villiers Palmer, who happened to be the king's royal mistress and mother of his 5 children. Palmer was also the Duchess of Cleveland, and she introduced Wycherley to many of her own personal circles. They seemed to get along very well, as Palmer became Wycherley's mistress. In Restoration England, there were patent theatres. King Charles allowed 2 theatre companies to thrive in London. They were the Duke's Company and the King's Company. The Duke's Company tended to prefer spectacle over any sort of quality writing, while the King's Company tended to prefer good writers and good actors. One of the many writers who wrote for the King's Company, other than Wycherley, included John Dryden, who was the first poet laureate, and who we will be talking about in another episode. Through these new connections, Wycherley was finally able to work on his writing, and he published several plays in the following years, including the 1672 production of The Gentleman Dancing Master, the 75 production of The Country Wife, and the 76 production of The Plain Dealer. The play I will be discussing will be The Country Wife. It is a classic piece of Restoration drama, as it highlights many character tropes that were very common in that era. The Country Wife is about a rake named Mr. Horner, who pretends to be sexually incapacitated so that he can seduce other men's wives. His plan is rather brilliant, especially when he states that he will now be able to tell apart women who want an affair from those who don't. According to Horner, a woman who wants an affair will look at him with disgust, while a woman who's not interested in an affair will treat him as she would have had otherwise. Any woman who looks at him with disgust, he will reveal his secret to, and they can have a nice time while the husband thinks that his wife is with a eunuch.
A quack is as fit for a pimp as a midwife for a bawd. They are still but in their own way both helpers of nature. Well, my dear doctor, hast thou done what I desired? I have undone you forever with women, and reported you throughout the whole town as bad as a eunuch, with as much trouble as if I had made you one in earnest. But have you told all the midwives you know, the orange wenches at the playhouse, the city husbands, and the old fumbling keepers at this end of the town? For they'll be the readiest to report it. I have told all the chambermaids, waiting women, tirewomen, and old women of my acquaintance, nay, and whispered it as a secret to 'em, and the whisperers of Whitehall, so that you need not doubt 'twill spread, and you will be as odious to the young handsome women as the smallpox. Well. Let me alone. If I can but abuse the husbands, I'll soon disabuse the wives. Stay, I'll reckon you up the advantages I am like to have by my stratagem. First, I shall be rid of all my old acquaintances, the most insatiable sorts of duns that invade our lodgings in the morning, and next, to the pleasure of making a new mistress, is that of being rid of an old one, and of all old debts. Love, when it comes to be so, is paid the most unwillingly. Well, you may be so rid of your old acquaintances, but how will you get any new ones? Doctor, thou wilt never make a good chemist, thou art so incredulous and impatient. Ask but all the young fellows of the town if they do not lose more time like huntsmen in starting the game than in running it down. One knows not where to find them, who will or will not. Women of quality are so civil you can hardly distinguish love from good breeding, and a man is often mistaken. But now I can be sure She that shows aversion to me loves the sport, as those women are gone, whom I warrant to be right. And then the next thing is your women of honour, you see. Call 'em are only chary of reputations, not their persons, and 'tis scandal they would avoid, not men. Now, may I have, by reputation of a eunuch, the privileges of one, and be seen in a lady's chamber in a morning as early as her husband, kiss virgins before their parents or lovers, and may be in short the pas partout of the town. Now, doctor. Nay, now you shall be doctor, and your process is so new that we do not know but it may succeed.
It is at this time that Mr. Pinchwife arrives with his new bride, who's from the country. And the rest of the play is filled with Horner shenanigans as they both try to cuckold Mr. Pinchwife. Now, you must be wondering what some of those terms mean. Well, let's start with libertine. Libertines emerged from the cavalier culture that Charles II encouraged in his court. Libertines are free thinkers who are not overly moral, especially when it comes to matters of sex. A rake is a libertine who pursues women for sex. They're considered the epitome of masculinity. A fop is generally a watered-down version of a rake, who does not see women as sex objects and tends to be very fashion-focused. The fop does evolve into the Victorian dandy, and although today dandyism is associated with homosexuality, during the Restoration period it was not, and as a modern reader you should not impose your modern understandings of stereotypes upon pieces written long before these stereotypes had arisen. The other type of man who appears in this play are fribbles. Fribbles are usually harmless but also useless men who try to be witty but fail drastically. They're there to be comic relief and tend to end up single and alone at the end of the play.
This is how Horner describes Mr. Sparkish, who is the fribble of the play. Ay, your earnest cheat is your trustee or executioner, your jealous man the greatest cuckold, your churchman the greatest atheist, and your noisy pert rogue of a wit the greatest fop, dullest ass, and worst company you shall see. For here he comes. Enter Sparkish.
You may have heard the phrase, putting the horns on someone. That phrase usually means someone cheating on someone else. Now, of course, this is a play that deals heavily with cheating. But another way of putting it is cuckolding. A husband who is cuckolded is someone whose wife has been sleeping around. There are two main couples in this play, Mr. and Mrs. Pinchwife, and Alethea and Harcourt. Mr. Pinchwife is so intent on keeping his wife innocent and away from London society that he inadvertently aids her affair with Horner. A lot of the humor in this play comes from Mr. Pinchwife's rather pathetic attempts at controlling his wife. Meanwhile, Alethea is the only respectable person in this entire play. She's moral and overall just a decent woman. Her attachment to Mr. Sparkish, who is the fribble of the play, is broken when she meets Mr. Harcourt, who quickly renounces his rakish ways and decides to marry her. Throughout the play, Wycherley makes his disdain clear for marriages made for money rather than love, and it is only Alethea and Harcourt's relationship that redeems marriages in this entire play. This play was greatly enjoyed by people of the Restoration period. It fit in perfectly with their love of sexual innuendo, sexual subject matter, and witty dialogue. But of course, as time rolled on and the Georgians and later Victorians came in, this play went out of fashion really quickly. Within a century, it had been watered down to a version written by David Garrick called The Country Girl, which is a rather dull retelling of the story that is much more moral, but also much less funny. Wycherley continued to have a good court life, but in 1678 he went abroad, and there he met the Countess of Drogheda, who he married in secret. This marriage led to Wycherley being away from court for quite a bit of time, so much time, in fact, that he lost his position as tutor to the king's bastard son, the Duke of Richmond. Having lost favour in court, the death of his wife brought even more bad news, as she had been involved in a very long lawsuit, which now Wycherley inherited as her widow. This lawsuit soon drove Wycherley into debt, and eventually debtor's prison, where he stayed for many years, before King James II had pity and pulled him out. Now a much older man, he was put on a small pension that lasted until James II's deposition in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. But by then he had managed to support himself a little bit better. Wycherley died in 1716, only a few years after completing a volume of poetry which had been edited by none other than a young Alexander Pope. Wycherley's wit and ability to write satire and farce made him a welcome addition to Charles II's court, and although his understanding of human sexual desires horrified the Victorians, it thrilled his Restoration audience, much in the same way as it thrills and entertains modern audiences.